Three black SUVs turned off the county road just after sunrise, and the gravel under their tires sounded like something breaking. Inside her double-wide at the edge of Marrow Creek, an old woman named Eleanor Whitlock was counting $47 in coins on her kitchen table. People in town had long since decided she was the kind of woman the world forgets on purpose. But what those men in tailored suits were about to tell her would unravel 28 years of silence. And the envelope in the lead attorney's briefcase had her name on it in handwriting she had not seen since the winter of 1997. Before we go any further, if stories about quiet kindness and the long memory of strangers mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe. This channel is built for people who still believe that what you give in the dark always finds its way back to the light. The morning had started the way every morning started for Eleanor. She had risen at 5 the way she had risen at 5 for 40 years, when the diner had been hers and the world had still needed her hands. The double-wide groaned the way it always groaned. The space heater clicked twice and gave up. She put a kettle on the stove and stood by the window in her flannel robe watching her breath fog the glass. Outside Marrow Creek lay under a thin sheet of November frost. The hills of East Tennessee rose behind the trailer park, like the shoulders of old men hunched against the cold. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked once and then forgot why. Eleanor was 70 years old. Her hair had gone the color of weathered fence posts. Her hands were spotted now, and slower than they used to be. And she watched them with the polite curiosity of someone borrowing a stranger's tools. She had buried a son in 1995. She had signed divorce papers in 1996. She had buried a second husband, Roy, in 2008. She had sold the diner in 2010 when the bank ran out of patience and she ran out of fight. And since then, she had lived on Social Security, on the kindness of the Baptist church up the road, and on the stubborn refusal to ask anyone for anything. She sat down at the kitchen table and counted her money again. $47. The electric bill was $62. She moved the coins into two piles and stared at them as if staring might multiply the smaller one. After a while, she got up and put the kettle back on because the first one had gone cold while she counted. That was when she heard the tires. She did not at first look up. Tires came and went on the county road. But these tires did not pass. They slowed. They turned onto her gravel drive, and there were too many of them. She rose halfway from her chair and pulled the curtain back with one finger. 3 black SUVs. Her first thought was the bank. Her second thought was the county. Her third thought, the one that settled in her chest like a cold stone, was that whatever they had come to take, she had nothing left to give them. She tied her robe tighter. She smoothed her hair. She opened the front door before they could knock, because she had learned a long time ago that meeting trouble on its way in was always better than waiting for it to find you sitting down. 3 men stood on her porch, suits the color of charcoal, shoes polished to a soft black shine that did not belong on her broken steps. The man in front was older than the others. Gray at the temples, kind eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses. He removed his hat the way men did in old movies with both hands. His voice was low and careful. Mrs. Whitlock, formerly Eleanor Dawson of Dawson's Kitchen on Old Highway 70. May we come in? We have been looking for you for a long time. She had not heard the name Eleanor Dawson spoken aloud since 1998. The sound of it on a stranger's tongue knocked something loose inside her chest. She stepped back from the door. The 3 of them filled her small living room, the way 3 deer fill a clearing, careful not to break anything by being too much. The lead man introduced himself as Ellis Hargrove. His associates stayed near the door, not standing guard so much as standing witness. Eleanor offered them coffee out of habit, and Ellis accepted out of kindness. and she went to the kitchen with shaking hands to pour from the pot she had already brewed, because the pretending of normal was the only handhold she had. When she came back, he was holding a folder he had not opened. He waited until she sat. He waited until the cup stopped trembling in her grip. Then he said very gently, "Mrs. Whitlock, I need to ask you about the winter of 1997. There was a boy, 17, maybe 18. He carried a guitar in a case held together with duct tape. He would have come into your diner on a very cold night." The room went still. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, and Eleanor did not hear it. 28 years collapsed into the space between two breaths. She remembered the boy the way you remember a song you have not sung in a long time. The melody comes first before the words. She remembered the bell over the diner door. She remembered the way the cold had come in with him, a whole season pushed through the doorway by one thin teenager in a canvas jacket too light for February. She remembered his hands wrapped around the edge of the counter for warmth, the way Danny's hands used to wrap around a coffee mug the morning of an exam. "I remember him," she said. Her voice did not feel like her own. "He never told me his name. He stayed a few weeks. He left a note when he went." Alice Hargrove nodded once slowly, as if a long question had finally been answered. He opened the folder. He slid a photograph across the table. The man in the photograph was older, maybe 40. He stood on a stage with a single spotlight cutting through the dark behind him, a guitar cradled in his arms the way you cradle something living. His hair was longer. His face had filled out, but the eyes were the same. Eleanor would have known those eyes in any photograph, in any light, at any age. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the boy." She touched the photograph with one finger the way you touch the glass of a casket. Outside, a single crow called from the bare branch of the dogwood by her porch. His name was Silas Brennan. Alice said, "He became one of the most successful singer-songwriters of his generation. You almost certainly know his music even if you never knew his name." Eleanor sat very still. She felt the weight of $47 in coins still sitting on her kitchen table behind her, and she felt the weight of a stage spotlight in a photograph in front of her. And the distance between those two weights was so vast, she could not measure it without falling in. Alice reached into his jacket pocket and produced a phone. "I would like to play you something," he said, "if you can bear it." She nodded because she did not trust her voice. He set the phone on the table between them. He pressed a button. The first chord came soft the way light comes through a curtain. A guitar she did not recognize, played by a man she had only known as a hungry boy. The melody walked into the room on quiet feet, and then the voice, his voice, older than the one she remembered, weathered the way a fence post weathers smooth and rough at once lived in. He sang two verses she did not know, and then the chorus. The chorus was her own words. The words she had said to him one February night in the diner, after the dishes were done and the chairs were up on the tables, and the world outside the windows had gone the deep blue of country dark. She had said those words to a boy she did not know, because he had asked her how grief worked, and she had not had a careful answer, only a true one. She had told him that the people we lose do not leave. They become part of how we move through the world. They live in our choices, in our kindness, in the way we love what is still here. She had said it once, to one boy, on one night. And here it was coming back at her through a stranger's phone, sung by a voice that had carried her words to places she would never go. Her hand came up to her mouth. The coffee cup slipped from her other hand. It hit the floor and broke into 3 pieces, and she did not look down. Alice paused the song. The room was very quiet. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said after a long moment, "those words, The chorus, that is what you told him, isn't it? She could not answer. She could only nod. He let her sit with it. He did not rush her. The two younger men by the door looked at the floor the way men do when something private is happening in a room they cannot leave. Eleanor closed her eyes. She saw the diner. She saw the boy hunched over a paper napkin scribbling fast, his guitar forgotten beside him in the booth. She had thought at the time that he was writing a letter. She had given him space. She had gone back to wiping the counter. She had never asked what he wrote. When she opened her eyes again, the photograph of the man on the stage was still there. The boy had grown into him. The napkin had grown into a song. And the song she understood now had grown into something she could not yet name. I need to show you one more thing, Ellis said. He drew a document from the folder. It was old. The paper had gone the color of weak tea at the edges. The ink was the gray of an old typewriter ribbon. A copyright registration form, United States Copyright Office, dated June 4th, 1998. He turned it toward her and pointed to a line near the bottom. Under the word lyrics, two names were listed. The first was Silas Brennan. The second was Eleanor Dawson. She stared at her own maiden name on a piece of paper she had never seen before in her life. The typeface was faded. The signature beside it was Silas's in careful 17-year-old handwriting, the same handwriting she had found on a note left on her counter one March morning 28 years ago. He registered you as co-writer, Ellis said quietly. From the very first filing in 1998, every album, every license, every royalty statement, your name has been on this song from the day he registered it. His lawyers questioned him at the time. He refused to remove it. He said the words were yours, and the words were the song, and that was the end of the discussion. Eleanor's hand drifted to the document. Her fingers traced her own name. Eleanor Dawson, a woman she had been a lifetime ago. A woman who had run a diner and lost a son and learned the long arithmetic of grief. I didn't write anything, she said. Her voice had gone thin. I just talked to a boy who couldn't sleep. Alice's eyes were very kind. Mrs. Whitlock, he said, what you said to that boy became one of the most licensed songs of the past 3 decades. It has played at weddings and at funerals. It has been on movie soundtracks. It has been streamed more times than there are people in this state. And from the moment it was registered, half of everything it has ever earned has been placed in a trust under the name Eleanor Dawson, waiting for the day we could find you. The room tilted gently the way a small boat tilts when someone steps aboard. Eleanor did not speak. She could not. She looked down at her hands. The spotted hands of a 70-year-old woman in a flannel robe, and she thought of the $47 on the kitchen table behind her. And she thought of the boy with the duct-taped guitar case who had eaten her scrambled eggs at midnight and slept in her storage room with the space heater. And she thought for the first time in many years of her son Danny, who had been 19 when a man ran a red light on Highway 70 and took him out of the world. Outside, the crow called again. Ellis waited. When Eleanor finally spoke, it was not a question about money. It was the only question that mattered. Why didn't he come back? Why didn't he tell me? Ellis set the document carefully on the table. He folded his hands. He tried, he said. For more than 20 years he tried. He hired investigators, 3 different firms over the decades. But by the time he started looking, you had sold the diner. You had remarried. You had taken the name Whitlock. You had moved more than once. The trail kept going cold. He never gave up. He just kept losing the thread. Eleanor pressed her palm flat against the document as if to hold it still. "And now?" she asked. "Why now? Why are you here now after all these years?" Ellis Hargrove looked at her with the gentle steadiness of a man who had delivered hard news before and knew there was no kind way to soften the shape of it. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, "Silas Brennan passed away 9 months ago. Peacefully, in his sleep. He was 62 years old." Eleanor closed her eyes. She did not cry, not yet. The tears would come later in pieces over days. For now there was only the strange hollow of learning that a boy you had once fed had grown into a man and lived a whole life and left it again, all of it happening in a world that had been moving without you knowing. He left very specific instructions in his will. Alice went on softly. Instructions that led us eventually to a woman named Eleanor Whitlock in a trailer on a county road outside Marrow Creek, Tennessee. He asked us not to come empty-handed. He reached into his briefcase one more time. What he placed on the table was not a check. It was not a document. It was an envelope, cream-colored, the edges slightly worn as if it had been carried for a long time before it had been sealed. On the front, in careful handwriting, were 4 words. For Eleanor. When found. The handwriting was the handwriting of a grown man, not the boy's note she had kept in a kitchen drawer for 28 years. This was the same hand, but steadier. The hand of someone who had finally found his footing in the world. Eleanor reached for the envelope. Her fingers hovered over it for a long moment before they touched it. When she finally lifted it, she did not open it. She held it against her chest over her heart, the way her own mother had once held a telegram from the war. Alice rose. He gathered his folder. He gave her a small nod that contained more respect than any speech. "We will be in town for a few days," he said. "There are matters to discuss when you are ready. The trust, his final wishes. There is no hurry, Mrs. Whitlock. Not anymore. Take what time you need." He moved toward the door. The 2 younger men opened it for him. A breath of November air came in, sharp and clean, smelling of frost and old leaves. At the threshold, Ellis paused. He turned back. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, "I have practiced law for 31 years. I have read many wills. I have never read one written quite the way his was. He wanted me to tell you something in his own words before I left you with the envelope." He took a breath. He spoke as if reciting. He said, "Tell her the napkin is in a frame on the wall of my studio. Tell her I read it every morning for 28 years. Tell her she did not just feed a hungry boy. She taught a hungry boy how to stay." The door closed. The SUVs started their engines. The gravel crunched in reverse. The sound of tires faded down the county road back the way they had come, and the silence they left behind was a different silence than the one they had found. Eleanor sat alone in her living room with an envelope against her chest. She did not open it, not yet. The ceiling fan turned slowly. The space heater clicked twice and gave up again. On the kitchen table behind her, $47 in coins still sat in 2 small piles. They looked somehow like they belonged to a different woman now. A woman she had been an hour ago. A woman who had not yet known that something she had given away in the dark was all this time walking the world with her name on it. She rose. She crossed to the window. She watched the gravel drive settle back into stillness. Then she walked slowly to the bedroom at the back of the trailer. She knelt in front of the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, the chest that had belonged to her grandmother and would belong to no one after her. She lifted the lid. The smell of cedar and old paper rose to meet her like a small ghost. Inside, beneath a folded quilt and a stack of Danny's school photographs, was a small wooden tin she had not opened in years. She lifted it out. She set it on her lap. She opened the lid. On top of everything, folded into a careful square, was a paper napkin from Dawson's kitchen. Yellowed now, soft at the creases from being touched too many times in the early years and then not enough in the later ones. She had kept it without knowing why. Some instinct had told her even then that it mattered. She unfolded it with both hands. The boy's handwriting was still there in cramped pencil, lines and lines of it. The beginnings of a song she had never heard him finish. She turned it over. On the back in pencil that had faded almost to a whisper were 5 words she had completely forgotten writing. Stay the night, figure it out tomorrow. Eleanor sat on the bedroom floor and stared at her own handwriting from 28 years ago, and the envelope from Ellis Hargrove sat unopened on the bed behind her, and she understood somewhere in the bones of her chest that the next time she stood up from this floor, she would not be the same woman who had knelt down on it. Outside, the first slow snow of the season began to fall. The snow fell for an hour before Eleanor moved. She knelt on the bedroom floor with the napkin in one hand and the unopened envelope on the bed behind her. And she watched the window go from pale gray to white to the soft blue of a storm settling in. Her knees ached. The space heater in the living room clicked twice and gave up for the 3rd time that morning. She did not get up to fix it. She turned the napkin over and over in her hands, looking at the boy's handwriting on one side and her own on the other. And she felt for the first time in many years the strange weight of being 2 people at once. The woman she was now, the woman she had been then, both of them holding the same square of paper across a span of 28 winters. When she finally rose, it was not to open the envelope. It was to make the bed. That was how Eleanor Whitlock handled the things she could not yet face. She made the bed. She washed the cup that had broken into 3 pieces on the living room floor, swept the shards into a paper bag, set the bag by the door. She put the kettle on a 3rd time. She picked up the $47 in coins from the kitchen table and slid them slowly into the jar above the refrigerator, where she had always kept the bill money. She put the envelope from Ellis Hargrove on the kitchen counter. She put the napkin beside it. She stood there and looked at the 2 pieces of paper, as if they were strangers she had invited in by mistake. Then she put on her coat. She did not have a plan. She had only the knowledge that if she stayed in that trailer for 1 more hour, the silence would crack her open and pour everything out, and there would be no putting any of it back. She drove the 7 miles to First Hope Baptist Church through the slow snow with both hands at 10 and 2. The wipers worked one side of the windshield better than the other. The radio played a hymn she had known since she was a girl, and she did not turn it up, and she did not turn it off. She let it sit at the edge of hearing the way old comforts are meant to sit. The church parking lot was empty except for 1 car, a pale blue sedan with a dent in the passenger door. Eleanor knew that car the way she knew her own hands. She parked beside it and sat for a moment with the engine off, breathing fog into the cold. Hattie Mae Crowder was in the fellowship hall, alone drying mugs with a thin white towel. Hattie was 68 years old and built like a woman who had carried other people's burdens her whole life and meant to keep on doing it. Her hair was a careful silver. Her hands had the gentle competence of a nurse, which she had been for 31 years, before her own husband took sick and she had set the job down. She looked up when the door opened, and she read Eleanor's face the way she read scripture, slowly and without rushing past anything. She did not ask what was wrong. Her voice was low and warm. "There's coffee on. Sit down." Eleanor sat. Hattie poured. The mugs were the heavy white kind churches always have, the kind that survive being dropped on linoleum. Eleanor wrapped both hands around hers and did not drink. Hattie sat down across from her and waited. After a while, Eleanor took the napkin out of her coat pocket and laid it flat on the table between them. "I gave this to a boy in 1997, she said. "I have just been told that what I wrote on the back of it is now the chorus of a song that has played at half the funerals in America." Hattie did not laugh. She did not gasp. She put her glasses on the ones that hung from a chain around her neck, and she leaned forward and read the napkin slowly both sides. She read it twice. Then she sat back and folded her hands and looked at Eleanor with the particular steadiness of a friend who has known you long enough not to flatter you. "Honey," she said, "you are going to need to tell me this from the start." Eleanor told her. The SUV's the lawyer with the silver glasses, the photograph of the man on the stage, the voice on the phone, the chorus, the copyright form with her maiden name in faded type, the boy who had grown up and lived a whole life and died 9 months ago without her ever knowing he had spent 20 years looking for her, the envelope she had not opened, the trust she could not bring herself to believe in. She did not cry while she told it. She held the napkin between 2 fingers like it might fly away if she let go. When she was finished, Hattie was quiet for a long time. She looked out the fellowship hall window at the snow piling on the dogwoods. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with 1 finger. Then she said very plainly, "Eleanor, I want you to listen to me. Kindness is not a debt, it is a seed, and you do not get to choose when it blooms. You don't get to choose where it falls, and you do not get to give it back just because it grew into something bigger than the hand that planted it." Eleanor looked down at the table. Her voice came thin. "I don't know how to be a woman who has money, Hattie. I don't know how to be a woman whose words are on a record. I have been the woman who counts coins for 40 years. That is the only woman I know how to be." Hattie reached across the table and put her hand over Eleanor's. Her palm was warm from the mug. "Then learn the new one slowly," she said, "and let your friends help." They sat that way for a long time. The radiator in the corner ticked. Outside, the snow filled in the tire tracks of the parking lot until Eleanor's car and Hattie's car looked like 2 stones half buried at the edge of a creek. 3 days later, Eleanor drove to Knoxville with Hattie in the passenger seat. She had told Hattie she did not need company. Hattie had told her that company was not for needing. They left at dawn. The mountains were dusted white. The interstate was nearly empty. Eleanor drove the speed limit exactly and gripped the wheel as if it might come loose in her hands. The bank was a tall glass building downtown. The carpet was the color of dry mud, and the lights overhead hummed in a way that made Eleanor's teeth feel loose. A young woman in a navy blazer led them to a conference room. A man in a tie thinner than Eleanor's wedding ring laid documents in front of her one after the other in a steady cascade. She tried to read them. The words moved on the page. The numbers moved with them. There were more zeros than she had ever seen lined up next to her own name, and they did not feel like money. They felt like a foreign language she was being asked to vow to honor in court. At one point, she picked up a pen and began to sign on a line that was not the line. Hattie's hand came down gently on the back of her wrist. Hattie's voice was soft. "Not that one, honey. The one below." Eleanor lifted the pen. She looked at her own hand. The hand of a woman who had cooked 30,000 breakfasts and wiped 20,000 counters, and she felt the heat rise to her face. She set the pen down. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not finish signing anything that day. In the car going home, she did not speak for 40 miles. Then she said, looking straight ahead at the road, "I do not deserve this." Hattie looked at her for a long moment. Hattie's voice was steady. "Eleanor Whitlock, deserve is the wrong word. It has been the wrong word for a long time. The right word is asked. He asked you to receive it. Will you? Eleanor did not answer. The snow on the shoulders of the road glowed pink in the late light. The mountains held the day's last color for as long as they could. When she got home, she opened the envelope. She did not read it all at once. She sat on the edge of her bed with the bedside lamp on, and she unfolded the single sheet of cream paper. And she read 3 lines and folded it again and pressed it to her chest. Then 3 more lines. Then 3 more. She read it the way a person eats food after a long sickness, in careful spoonfuls with rests in between. Silas had written, "I always knew they would find you eventually. I just wish I could have been there to see your face." Silas had written, "You did not feed a hungry boy. You taught a hungry boy how to stay." Silas had written, "My mother's name was Marrow. When you told me yours was Eleanor, I did not think it was a coincidence. I thought it was a hand on my back pushing me toward the only door that would open." Eleanor folded the letter at that line and could not read further that night. She put it in the drawer of her nightstand. She turned out the lamp. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind move around the corners of the trailer, and she did not sleep so much as wait until the dark thinned into morning. The story should have stayed inside her house. It did not. Small towns do not work that way. By Sunday, the whole congregation at First Hope had heard some version of it. By Monday, it had reached the men who drank coffee at the Phillips 66 station every morning. By Tuesday, it had reached Brenda Whitlock. Brenda was the woman who had once been married to Eleanor's nephew by marriage. The marriage had ended 10 years ago. The relation, by any fair reading, had ended with it. But Brenda was a woman who held on to titles long after the deed had been transferred. She still called herself a Whitlock at the bank. She still came to church in the front pew on Easter. She had a smile she used for funerals and a smile she used for cameras, and she had not used either one on Eleanor in years. On Wednesday morning, Brenda's silver SUV pulled into Eleanor's gravel drive. She did not come alone. A man in a brown suit followed her up the porch steps, briefcase in hand, the cuffs of his pants too short by an inch. Eleanor opened the door before they knocked. She did not invite them in. She stood in the doorway in her cardigan with the napkin already folded back into the drawer behind her, as if she had felt them coming. Brenda's voice was bright and false. "Eleanor, honey, we need to talk." Eleanor did not answer. She waited. The man in the brown suit cleared his throat. He introduced himself as an attorney representing the Whitlock family interests. He used the word interest several times. He said something about the family name, about expectations, about how it had come to their attention, that Eleanor was the beneficiary of a substantial estate, and that there were questions of family standing to consider. Eleanor listened. Her face did not move. When he finished, she spoke once quietly. "I was Eleanor Dawson when that boy came into my diner. The Whitlock name had nothing to do with it. The Whitlock family had nothing to do with it. And you, Brenda, were not yet married to a cousin who has since divorced you." Brenda's smile thinned at the edges. Brenda's voice came sharper. "We will see about that." She handed Eleanor a folded paper, a letter of intent. The man in the brown suit said something about court dates, about preliminary motions, about how things would be easier for everyone if Eleanor would simply agree to discuss a fair division. Eleanor took the paper. She did not look at it. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it for a long minute, breathing slowly. Her heart was loud. Her hands were cold. She walked to the kitchen and set the folded letter on the counter beside the envelope from Ellis Hargrove and the napkin. And she stood there and looked at the 3 pieces of paper as if they were 3 roads diverging in a wood she had not chosen to walk. She called Ellis Hargrove that afternoon. His voice on the line was the same low calm she remembered. He listened. He asked her to mail him a copy of the letter. He told her gently not to worry. He told her that Silas's will was the most carefully written document he had ever filed, and that no court in Tennessee would entertain a claim from a woman who had never met the man whose estate was being divided. She believed him, mostly, but that night she did not sleep at all. Word traveled the other way too. In a town the size of Marrow Creek, news of trouble brings out two things at once: the vultures and the neighbors. The vultures had already come. The neighbors followed quietly behind. On Thursday morning, Eleanor found a paper bag on her porch step. Inside was a loaf of banana bread, still warm, wrapped in a kitchen towel she recognized. No note. The towel had a faded embroidery of a rooster in one corner. She knew the rooster. It belonged to Grace Halloran, who had given birth to her oldest boy in the back of Eleanor's old station wagon in the blizzard of 1991, because there had been no time to reach the hospital. On Friday, there was a pint jar of homemade soup, tomato and rice. The handwriting on the masking tape lid said simply, "For Miss Eleanor." The handwriting belonged to Walter Pickens, who had eaten free at Dawson's kitchen for 3 months in the winter of 1989, when he had lost his job at the sawmill and had been too proud to ask his sister for help. On Saturday morning, there were 2 cords of firewood stacked against the side of her trailer. Eleanor did not see who had brought them. She only knew that the wood was dry, split clean, and that the work of stacking it had taken someone the better part of a night. She stood in her yard in her robe and looked at the firewood for a long time. The morning was cold and very still. Somewhere in the trees behind the trailer, a single cardinal sang. She had not known. She had not known any of them had remembered. She had been so busy being the woman who needed nothing that she had forgotten she was also the woman who had once given without keeping count, and that other people kept their own quiet ledgers, and that her name had been entered in more of them than she would ever know. She sat down on the porch step. She let the tears come. They were not sad tears. They were the kind that arrive when a person finally understands they have been held all along by hands they could not see. The first small victory came the following Tuesday. Ellis Hargrove called her at 9 in the morning. Brenda's attorney had withdrawn his letter of intent. He had reviewed the terms of Silas Brennan's will and concluded in his professional opinion that no claim could be sustained. There would be no court date. There would be no division. The matter was closed before it had truly opened. Eleanor put the phone down and walked to the window and watched a pair of crows argue in the dogwood. And she felt for the first time since the SUVs had come that she was standing on ground that would hold her weight. That afternoon, Ellis arrived at her door with one more thing. He carried a small wooden box. He set it on her kitchen table. He did not open it. He waited until she was sitting down and the coffee was poured and the room was quiet. His voice was gentle. He left instructions that this be given to you in person, only after the legal matters were settled. He was very particular. Eleanor lifted the lid. Inside, lying on a bed of dark green velvet, was the napkin. The original. The one she had kept all these years was its twin. The one with the lyrics scrawled on the front and her own pencil words on the back. But this one was different. The pencil was sharper. The lyrics on the front were neater, copied over by an older hand. And on the back, where her own writing had been, the words had been carefully traced over in fine black ink, so the pencil would never fade. Stay the night. Figure it out tomorrow. Eleanor lifted the napkin out with both hands. She turned it gently. Beneath it, in the bottom of the box, was a small square of folded paper she had never seen. It was not part of the napkin. It was its own thing, tucked carefully under the velvet lining. She lifted it out. She unfolded it. It was a photograph, not of Silas on a stage, not of an album cover. It was a photograph of a young man, maybe 20 years old, sitting on the steps of a wraparound porch with a guitar across his knees. He had Silas's eyes. He had Silas's mouth. But he had something else too. Something around the set of his jaw, the angle of his shoulders, the easy way he held the guitar that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. He looked exactly like Danny, not the way a stranger looks like another stranger, the way a son looks like a brother. On the back of the photograph, in the same careful black ink as the napkin, Silas had written 4 words. Eleanor's hands began to shake. She read the words once. She read them twice. She set the photograph down on the table very carefully, as if it might break. And she looked up at Alice Hargrove with the wide, quiet eyes of a woman who has just understood that the story she has been told is not the whole story, and that there is one more door, and that the door is already open, and that someone is standing on the other side of it waiting for her to walk through. Eleanor turned the photograph over a second time. She read the 4 words in Silas's careful black ink the way a person reads a verse from a Bible they thought they had already finished. Daniel Eleanor Brennan, born 2003. Across the table, Alice Hargrove sat very still and let her find her own footing in the new shape of things. The kitchen clock above the stove ticked once. The kettle forgotten on the burner gave a soft sigh as the water inside it began to settle. Her voice came out of her. Before she knew she had decided to speak, he named his son after both of them. Alice nodded only once. His voice was low and careful. Daniel for the boy you lost. Eleanor for the woman who told him the boy was not gone. He had the names entered together on the birth certificate. He told the hospital it was not a mistake. Eleanor looked at the photograph again. The young man on the porch steps held the guitar the way Silas had held it 28 years ago, with the loose ease of someone who had grown up listening to it. But the slope of his shoulders was Danny's slope. The half-smile was Danny's half-smile. It was as if her son had walked through a door in another house, in another life, and come out the other side wearing a stranger's face. She set the photograph down beside the napkin in the wooden box. She did not yet ask the question. Alice waited. He understood that some questions have to gather their own weight before they can be lifted. When she finally asked, her voice was steady. "Where is he? Where is Daniel?" Alice reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a folded sheet of paper. He laid it flat in front of her. A name, an address in Boston, a phone number, a school, Berklee College of Music. "He is 23 years old," Alice said. "He has known about you for most of his life. He has been waiting for permission to come." Eleanor closed the box gently. Her hand rested on the lid for a long moment. She said quietly, "Then tell him to come." Alice Hargrove smiled for the first time since the morning the SUVs had come up her drive. He had a tired smile. The smile of a man who had carried a long task across a great distance and had finally been allowed to set it down. The week that followed was the slowest week of Eleanor's life, and also the fastest. Snow came and went and came again. Hattie brought a casserole on Tuesday, and another on Thursday, and did not stay long either time, because Hattie was a woman who understood that some hours have to belong to one person alone. Eleanor read the rest of Silas's letter in pieces. She read the line where he asked her to use the money to help other lost children the way she had once helped him. She read the line where he wrote simply, "I have tried to make choices that would make you proud. I hope I did okay." She read that line and put the letter down and sat in her armchair for an hour without moving. and the light from the kitchen window crossed the floor slowly and reached her feet and warmed them. She decided in that hour what she would do with the money. She did not yet say it aloud, but the shape of it settled in her chest, the way a stone settles in a creek bed, finding the place where the current had been waiting for it. He came on a Saturday afternoon. Eleanor heard the car before she saw it. A small rental sedan moving slowly up the gravel drive, the driver leaning forward over the wheel. The way young people lean forward when they are looking for a house number they have only seen on a screen. She stood at the kitchen window with her hands flat on the counter and watched him park. He sat in the car for a long minute before he got out. She understood that minute. She had sat in cars that way herself before walking into hospital rooms, before walking into funerals, before walking into the first day of a life that would not look like the last one. When he stepped out, he carried a guitar case. The case was old. The duct tape on the corners was new in places and ancient in others. The stickers had faded to ghosts of themselves. She knew the case the way she knew the napkin. She had seen it carried through her diner door on a February night when the cold had been a living thing. Daniel Brennan walked up the porch steps and stopped at the door without knocking. He took off his cap. He held it in front of him with both hands. He was tall, taller than Silas had been at 17. He had Silas's eyes gentled by his mother's softer mouth. But when he looked at her through the screen, when the porch light caught his face at a certain angle, Eleanor saw her own son. She saw Danny at 23, the age Danny would never reach, standing on her porch with a guitar in his hand and the whole long road of a life ahead of him. She opened the door. She did not speak. She could not. He spoke first very softly. "Mrs. Whitlock, my father told me about you my whole life. I am sorry it took me this long to come." She reached up and put one hand on the side of his face. He was warm. He was real. The wood of the porch was solid under her feet. The cardinal in the dogwood was singing the same 3 notes it had been singing for 30 years. She held her palm there for the length of 2 breaths, and then she stepped back from the door, and she said the only thing that mattered. Her voice came soft and sure. "Come inside. I have coffee on." He stayed 3 days. He slept on the fold-out couch in her living room, the way Silas had slept in the storage room behind the diner. He carried in firewood from the cord Walter had left her. He fixed the loose hinge on her bathroom door without being asked, because the gift of fixing things, it turned out, was something a father could pass to a son, even through a screen of years. He played the guitar in the evenings, softly sitting on the floor with his back against the couch, and Eleanor sat in her armchair and listened, and the trailer was warmer than it had been in 15 winters. On the second night, he played her the song. He played it the way it had first been written before the record producers and the studio engineers had layered it into something larger. Just the guitar, just one voice. The chorus came around the words she had spoken to a boy in a diner in 1997, and Daniel Brennan sang her own words back to her in a kitchen in Marrow Creek. And Eleanor did not cry because tears were too small a thing for what she was feeling. She listened until the last chord faded into the hum of the refrigerator. She said softly, "Your father had a beautiful voice." Daniel looked up at her. He said quietly, "He told me my voice was his, because his voice was yours." On the third morning before he left, he reached into his guitar case and took out a small folded square of paper. He unfolded it carefully. The paper was older than he was. The handwriting was Silas's, but it was Silas at 40, not Silas at 17. He set the paper on the kitchen table in front of her. He spoke gently. "He wrote this when I was very young. He told me that if I ever met you, I should give it to you in person." Eleanor read it. There were only 9 words. Tell her Danny had a brother all along. She read it 3 times. She folded it back along its old creases. She set it down beside the napkin and the photograph and the letter on the kitchen table that had become over these weeks an altar of sorts. A small flat place where the pieces of a long story had finally come to rest in the same room. She stood up. She walked to her bedroom. She came back carrying something in her closed hand. She sat down again across from Daniel Brennan and opened her palm. A thin silver chain. At the end of it, a man's silver ring. The band was scuffed. The inside was worn smooth by 26 years of being touched by her thumb in idle moments. It had been Danny's ring. He had been wearing it the night the car came through the red light on Highway 70. The paramedics had given it back to her in a small plastic bag, and she had worn it around her neck ever since under her collar, where no one could see it, but she could feel it against her breastbone every time she drew breath. She undid the clasp. She let the ring slide off the chain into her palm. She reached across the table. Her voice came quiet and certain. "Your father said you were Danny's brother. Then this belongs to you now." Daniel Brennan did not speak. He held out his hand. She set the ring in his palm and folded his fingers closed around it. He bowed his head. His shoulders moved once, twice the way a young man's shoulders move when he is trying very hard not to make a sound. Eleanor put her hand on the back of his head the way she had done it 1,000 times to Danny when he was small, and she held it there for a long moment, and the kitchen was very quiet. And the morning light came in pale and slow through the window above the sink. When he left, he took the guitar and the ring and a tin of Hattie's banana bread, and he promised to come back in the spring. Eleanor stood on the porch and watched the rental sedan turn back down the gravel drive. She did not feel the cold because the cold could not reach her in the place she had become. She did not buy a new house. She bought back the diner. It had stood empty for 15 years at the edge of Marrow Creek. The windows boarded the sign faded to a ghost of itself. The bank let it go for less than the trust had earned in interest in a single month. The contractor she hired was a man whose mother she had once driven to a doctor's appointment in a blizzard. He did not charge her labor. He told her he had been waiting 40 years to do something for her, and that she was not going to take that away from him by arguing. The work took 6 months. By the spring, the diner had a new roof and a new furnace and new paint on the porch trim. The sign above the door no longer said Dawson's Kitchen. The sign said in plain hand-painted letters, "The Marrow Creek House." Beside it, on a smaller wooden board nailed to the door at a careful angle, were 5 words burned into the wood with a hot iron by a young man who had driven down from Boston for the weekend just to do it. Stay the night. Figure it out tomorrow. It opened on a Friday in May. Hattie cut the ribbon because Eleanor said she could not bear to do it herself, and Hattie said that was the truest reason Hattie had ever heard to ask a friend for a favor. Reverend Calloway said a short blessing. The whole town came. Walter Pickens brought a cooler of sweet tea. Grace Halloran brought 3 pies. Brenda Whitlock did not come. Most people did not notice. The house had 4 bedrooms upstairs and a kitchen big enough to feed 12. It was a place for young people who had aged out of the foster system in East Tennessee and had nowhere yet to land. The rules were simple. You could stay as long as you needed. You ate what was cooked. You helped with the dishes. You were not asked on the first night what you were running from. You were only asked if you were hungry. The first 4 arrived in June. A girl from Knoxville with a duffel bag and a quiet face. 2 brothers from Kingsport who had been separated in foster care for 9 years and reunited the week before. A boy from Johnson City with a backpack and a sketchbook, and shoes that were 2 sizes too small. Eleanor met them at the door. She gave them each a key. She showed them the kitchen. That night she made breakfast for dinner. Scrambled eggs, bacon, buttered toast, a stack of pancakes high enough that the boy from Johnson City put down his fork and laughed without meaning to. And the sound of that laugh in her kitchen was the closest thing to music Eleanor had heard since the night Daniel had played her the song. Behind her on the wall above the booth where Silas had once written on a napkin, 3 things hung in matching wooden frames. The original napkin with the lyrics on one side and her own pencil words on the other. A photograph of Danny at 19 leaning against the hood of his first car, the silver ring on his finger, catching the summer light. And the platinum record from a song that had played at half the funerals in America, with a small brass plate at the bottom that read in plain letters, "For Eleanor, who taught a hungry boy how to stay." Eleanor stood at the stove with a spatula in her hand and watched the 4 young people eat, and she felt for the first time in 30 years that the ground she stood on was the ground she was meant to be standing on. Hattie came in through the back door with a fresh pot of coffee. She did not speak. She set the pot on the burner. She put her hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Eleanor reached up and covered Hattie's hand with her own, and the 2 of them stood there a moment in the warm yellow light of the kitchen, while 4 young strangers ate pancakes at the long table behind them, and outside the windows the late spring evening went soft and blue over the hills of East Tennessee. After dinner, when the dishes were done and the 4 young people had gone upstairs to rooms that were theirs for as long as they needed them, Eleanor stepped out onto the porch alone. The night smelled of cut grass and wet dogwood and wood smoke from someone's chimney down the road. The cardinal in the tree behind the diner had gone quiet. A single light burned in the upstairs window where the girl from Knoxville was unpacking her duffel bag. Eleanor sat down on the top step. She took the napkin from her cardigan pocket. The second one, the copy Silas had kept in his studio for 28 years and traced over in fine black ink so the words would never fade. She unfolded it. She read her own writing in the soft porch light. "Stay the night. Figure it out tomorrow." She folded it again. She held it in her lap. She thought about a February night in 1997 when a thin boy with a duct-taped guitar case had walked into a diner on the edge of a town no one ever stopped in, and she had said 5 words to him because she did not know what else to say. She thought about how those 5 words had walked the world for 28 years without her. She thought about how a seed can fall on frozen ground in the worst week of February and lie there through every storm forgotten by the hand that planted it. And how one spring many winters later, you can turn around and find an orchard at your door. She thought about Danny. She thought about Silas. She thought about Daniel Brennan on a porch in Boston holding a silver ring he had never asked for and would never take off. She thought about how the people we lose do not leave, how they only change the way they stay. The porch light flickered once. The girl's window upstairs went dark. Somewhere out in the dark hills, a single owl called twice and then was quiet. Eleanor put the napkin back into her pocket. She rose. She turned off the porch light. She stood for one more moment in the soft blue dark, listening to the small breathing of a house that for the first time in a long time was not empty. Then she went inside. If a story like this one stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you once helped and never heard from again, leave their name in the comments tonight. Just the first name. Just a moment of remembering. Somewhere out in the world, the seed you planted in a winter you have forgotten may already have become a tree, and someone somewhere may be sitting under it tonight.